Umar ibn Khattab signed agreements with the Christians of the Holy Land, Jerusalem, Elia, and he also signed agreements with the Christians of Egypt. For example, he promised to protect their churches and their properties. Umar said, وَإِنَّا أَعْطَيْنَاهُمُ الْعَهْدِ عَلَى أَن نُخَلِّي بَيْنَهُمْ وَبَيْنَ كَنَائِسِهِمْ. We have given them a covenant that we would leave them to worship freely in their churches, يَقُولُونَ فِيهَا مَا بَدَى لَهُمْ, and to say therein whatever they want, even though they're saying kufr. Umar ibn Khattab said, it is a covenant between us and them to say within their churches whatever they want. وَأَلَّا نُحَمِّلُهُمْ مَا لَا يُطِيقُونَ, and we will not overburden them, meaning we will not have them pay more than what they're able to pay. وَإِنْ أَرَادَهُمْ عَدُوَّهُمْ بِسُوءٍ قَاتَلْنَا دُونَهُمْ, and if an enemy wants to harm them, we would fight on their behalf to defend them. وَعَلَى أَن نُخَلِّيَ بَيْنَهُمْ وَبَيْنَ أَحْكَامِهِمْ, and we would allow them to appoint judges among themselves and to have their own separate legal system. إِلَّا أَن يَأْتُوا رَاضِينَ بِأَحْكَامِنَا فَنَحْكُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ, except if they choose voluntarily to come to our courts. وَإِنْ غَيَّبُوا عَنَّا لَمْ نَتَعَرَّضْ لَهُمْ, and if they stay away from us, we will not harm them. Brothers and sisters, these legal accommodations that were given to the non-Muslims under the Islamic Khilafah are not even given to us today in the 21st century. In the Western democracies today, the minorities are forced to accept the rules of the majority. That's democracy. Majority rules. However, in the Islamic Khilafah, the religious minorities have a right to have their separate legal system. They are free to choose which courts they want to go to, whether it's the Muslim or their own court system. And the rules of the majority do not apply to them. When we are told that we have religious freedom, what religious freedom do we have when we are forced to accept a legal system that is not Islamic? It's an issue of numbers in the West. While in the Muslim world, whether the Christians were a majority or a minority in a community, they had their rights protected, even if it's one person. So when we talk about Muslims and having rights in the West today, I think that's a broken record that doesn't play anymore. Now Muslims are going to come to realize, when they start hitting the hard walls, now when our community has, because in the old days, it was small families that came from back home, and whenever there's a dispute or an issue, they would solve it within the family. Now we have grew to become a large community. Now we're having problems. And without having a Islamic legal system, we are living in a state of religious and social anarchy. There are tremendous family problems that are going around among the Muslims, and we have no solution for them. For example, a wife is suffering because of an abusive husband. And this wife is a righteous, good sister. She is stuck between a rock and a hard place. She either goes to the kuffar legal system, and she feels that she's doing something wrong, or she just sits idly and accepts what's happening. Because there is no Islamic accommodation for her. Because we cannot have our laws, family laws, implemented among ourselves. So when we say that we have our rights and our freedoms, what rights do we have? If we're talking about your right to pray, they had that in Mecca. In the early days of da'wah, they were able to pray in Mecca. But that's not Islam. That's not all what Islam is about. Islam is about a way of life. When a wife runs away with the kids, what does the husband do? Sometimes it happens, a wife would just run away with the kids. He would go and date a kafir, and the kids end up growing up as non-Muslims. What can the father do? As parents, you want to discipline your children and bring them up to grow up as being good Muslims. They threaten to call the police on you. And you can't do anything. In the Western democracies, the state has more authority over your direct family, over your children, than yourself. In Islam, the family is protected. No one has access to your children. You have the upper hand in the family. It's not the judge or the Khalifa. So as Muslims, now we are starting to suffer because we don't have that accommodation. And unless Western governments give the Muslims that accommodation, the Muslims will wither away and die. Because our survival depends on our moral fabric, on our moral background. And our morals are gonna go away and dissolve if we don't have any legal system to protect them. Islam was very accommodating to the religious minorities. Not only did they exist, but not only did they survive, but they flourished. Christian Arabs flourished in Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Palestine, Iraq, and that's why they still exist today. If the Khulafa wanted to wipe them out, they could have done so easily. Easily. The Christians and the Jews had no power whatsoever to resist the will of the Khulafa. But they flourished. They flourished in Spain, they flourished. And the Yahud, in fact, would run away from Christian land and go and seek refuge with the Muslims. They ran away from oppressive Europe, from the oppression of the Romans, and they sought refuge in Spain. And when Spain fell in Catholic hands, they left Spain and went to Istanbul, to be under the watchful eye of the Khulafa of Banu Uthman. They chose to be right next to the Khalifa. Al-Ghazali says, إن الحرية الدينية التي كفلها الإسلام لأهل الأرض لم يعرف لها نظير في القارات الخمس ولم يحدث أن انفرد دين بالسلطة ومنح مخالفيه في الاعتقاد كل أسباب البقاء والازدهار مثل ما صنع الإسلام. He said, the religious freedom that was granted by Islam has never seen any similar situation to it on any of the 5 continents. And then he says, and this is an important point, a religion never had a monopoly over power and gave another religion freedom to exist except Islam. If we want to say that the West today is granting religious minorities freedom, that is because it is a secular system and it's not a religious system. However, there has never been in the history of man a religion that assumed political authority and gave religious freedoms to others but Islam. When the Christians were in power, they did not give others rights. When Jews are in power, they did not give others rights. However, when the Muslims were in power, in terms of a religion, only Islam gave religious minorities rights to exist. And I hope you see the difference, because we're talking about a religion that is ruling. Now the West is warning against theocracy, and they have a right to be worried because they experienced it. When the West was living under theocracies, you had the religious wars, you had the Inquisition, you had the burning at the stake. But they're making a mistake when they're assuming that Islam is the same, because Islam is an exception. Subhanallah, Umar ibn Khattab one day, he sees an old man begging. So he goes to that old man and he grabs him by the arm. And he says, "Min ayyi ahli al-kitabi ant?" From which people of the book are you? He said, I am a Jew. Umar told him, فَمَا حَمَلَكَ عَلَى مَا أَرَى? How come you are begging? He said, al-jizya, wal-haja, was-sin. Because I have to pay jizya, and I'm in need, and I'm old. Umar ibn Khattab held him by the hand, and he took him to his house, and he gave him money. And then he walked with him to the treasurer, and he told him, it is unfair for us to have them pay jizya when they're young, and then we forsake them when they become old. I want you to stop the jizya on everyone in a situation similar to him. Anyone who is in need like this old man, I want you to stop asking them for jizya. You drop the jizya on them. And I want you to give them a pension from Bayt al-Mal. He said it's unfair that we have him pay jizya when he's young, and now when he's old he goes around begging to pay the jizya. No, we should now pay him money. Brothers and sisters, Umar ibn Khattab didn't treat this man well because there was a strong Jewish lobby in Medina. He didn't treat him well because he wants the Jews of his constituency to vote for him. He wasn't doing it because of a political agenda. Umar ibn Khattab was doing it out of his sense of responsibility, out of his sense of justice. This is how we should treat our subjects, regardless of what their religion is. So you cannot look at it and interpret it and find some hidden agenda behind it or a hidden motive. This was done sincerely. Unlike in democracies, usually everything is done for a political reason. And subhanAllah, the Yahud found refuge in Muslim land. And now we see what is happening in Palestine, how the Muslims are treated. The dog biting the hand that feeds it. The Muslims are being oppressed now. And by the way, the reason why the state of Israel was established by the Jews is because of the Holocaust. So the Muslims pay for a European sin. It was because of the Holocaust the Jews said never again. We're not going to allow this to happen again. We're not going to live under anybody else. We want to have our own homeland. And who pays the price? The Muslims. And who gives them the Islamic land? It is the West. The West makes the problem, causes the problem, and then solves it by another problem. And that's the weird justice. Just like you find, we are sinful because our father Adam is sinful, and then Jesus will come and pay the price for it. So we are held accountable for something we didn't do, and then somebody else takes care of it. The innocent Isa has to suffer on the cross for my sins, and my sins are not really my sins, but they're the sins of my father. So it's upside down justice. So the Romans were mobilizing again against the Muslims, even though their emperor has already left. So the Muslims went to the people of Hims because they were mobilizing the forces close to Hims, and the Muslims felt that maybe they could take over Hims again. So the Muslims went to the people of Hims and said, we took away jizya from you with the promise of protecting you. And now, since we are unsure that we would be able to protect you from the Romans if they attack, here is your jizya. Take it back. The people of Hims were so impressed by that. They said, if it was the Romans, they would take it away from us and never give it back. We pray to Allah to bring you back to us. So now the people of Syria were asking for the Muslims to come back and rule them because they saw their justice. So the Muslims were not willing to fill up their coffers by abusing the people. No, it was a contract. We will protect you. You pay us jizya, we pay you back by offering you with security. Amr ibn al-As, immediately after Jerusalem was opened, receives orders from Umar ibn Khattab to march across to Africa.